And we're live. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Toronto Public Library's program on how to avoid tokenism, meaningful marketing through diversity and inclusion with Judy Milay. My name is Diana Lee, and I'm the Senior Services Specialist of Programming and Events, and I will be your facilitator for this live and online small business program. I'd like to start this event by acknowledging that Toronto Public Library is situated on Indigenous land and the Dish with One Spoon territory. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto Public Library gratefully acknowledges these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land. I also want to mention that we're actively working with different Indigenous presenters on virtual programs, including an upcoming program with an Indigenous artist who will be leading a traditional bead stringing workshop at the end of October. I'll post a link to this program in the chat box shortly in case anyone is interested. So a couple of features to highlight tonight on how you can engage with our special guest. You can comment and chat using the chat window on the right side of your screen, or if you are tuning in on mobile, you can swipe to toggle open the chat window. This is also where I've posted the online and social media policy and our rules of conduct for how we moderate our chat conversations. If you have a question for Judy, please use the Ask a Question feature located on the bottom of the window. Do take a look at this feature, even if you don't have a question, because you can upvote someone else's question and we'll be able to prioritize them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. We also have polls set up, so do take a look at the bottom of the screen and check this out. I also want to mention that in our efforts to make our programming more accessible, tonight's event is also live streamed to YouTube, where there is closed captioning. I can post a link to this in case this is preferred. TPL is committed to accessibility, and while we are still investigating different features, know that you can always contact us in advance if you have a request for accommodation. Information about this is available in our program description. And because this program is part of TPL's small business programming, we'd like to thank Shopify for their support and also encourage people who want to network over to our small business meetup groups where you can continue to connect with each other after this program and continue the discussions. We'll post a link to this group before we wrap things up. So to introduce our special guest tonight, meet Judy Milay, an activist and advocate for inclusivity in the outdoor industry and founder of Color the Trails, a community group for Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC, and allies interested in outdoor activities. Judy is also a content creator, model, and fellow at the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. Based out of Vancouver and originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Judy has tirelessly and fearlessly worked on increasing representation, particularly in the outdoor industry. She's worked with different global brands, organizations, local businesses, and tourism boards by sparking conversations and providing consultations on meaningful marketing campaigns, how to effectively raise the voices of underrepresented folks, and how to responsibly change the narrative on who participates in the outdoors. Tonight, Judy will share her experiences with building a business that currently works with other brands and businesses to bridge the diversity gap. She'll discuss how to establish trusted, safe spaces while growing a community of over 11,000 outdoor enthusiasts. Learn tips and examples used in the outdoor industry that can apply to any business tonight. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you, everybody. I'm hearing a little bit of echo, so I apologize. Hopefully.
Oh, we're good. It sounds okay on my side.
Okay, it must be just me. Okay. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that I reside on an unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation are here in Vancouver. And I'm extremely grateful to be living on this land and recreating in this beautiful land that they, of course, take care of. So I want to also thank you, the Toronto Public Library for having me and for me to be able to share with everyone today about my experience about tokenism, how do we pinpoint what tokenism is, And how do we then work as a collective to reduce tokenism and do a better job in terms of inclusion and representation. Okay, you can go on the next slide, Diana. Next one. Yeah, so just kind of briefly regarding founding Color the Trails. I founded Color the Trails about 3 years ago after spending a tremendous amount of time in the outdoor industry. I love hiking, I love skiing, and now I've gotten into mountain biking. But the one thing I noticed was that brands was doing a terrible job in terms of representing. And I'm just gonna remove my mic because I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I apologize. Everybody can hear me okay?
Oh, I think there's major feedback now.
Okay. A little bit better. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, just so much echo. And so my mission with Color the Trail is basically to introduce Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the outdoors. And I do that by partnering with a lot of brands to sponsor our event. And this is an opportunity for brands to be able to participate in terms of how they as a brand are working towards inclusivity by supporting and elevating a grassroots or movement. And we recognize also that diversity is not just based on race, but it's also based on sexuality, body size, as well as like individual ability to enjoy the outdoor in a very safe manner. We can go to the next one. We can go in the next one. Yeah, so just a quick outline for today is we're going to look at what is tokenism versus inclusive representation. When does representation become tokenistic, and what does meaningful inclusion looks like? And then we can also look at Rihanna versus the traditional marketing and how she's winning. And I use Rihanna as a test case because I've seen what she's done and how she's revolutionizing whether it's makeup or even her lingerie business to invite and include people who are often left out of the conversation as well as representation. We can do the next one. Next one. Yeah, so what is tokenism? And I'm just going to do quote, as you can read there, tokenism can be defined as a form of discrimination whereby minorities, such as members of racial and ethnic groups and women, fill roles usually reserved by dominant group member, especially white men. So that example will be based on my own personal work background. I was working for a private nonprofit organization here in Vancouver, and through that, I was the only Black woman in that nonprofit, and I experienced a lot of pushback in terms of any innovative solution that I was coming in terms of sustainable development, especially since we were working in the Great Lakes region of Africa, so Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, all those countries. And I found that anytime I came with a creative solution to help those regions to become self-sustaining, to be self-sufficient, I was met with gaslighting. I was met with always any idea that I presented was not really interested by the organization. That is tokenism. The organization basically placed me in the position there to try to sell my store as a refugee who comes from the Congo, is now working for them, and now who's like working and supporting people back in her home country to become self-sustaining, and never really giving me the opportunity to engage in any decision making, financial budgeting, any form of like financial stuff. They were not really interested. Instead, they were oftentimes sending me to donors to kind of tell my story so they can get funding. So this is what tokenism is, where you use an individual to try to pass or try to get a narrative out of them to benefit you without really taking them into consideration. We can go to the next one. So as I kind of like emphasize, so you recruit BIPOC to your former leadership position, but you keep all the power. Brands and businesses tend to hire a lot of BIPOC to be the face, to be the spokesperson for diversity. But at the end of the day, there's really no power coming from it. And for me, this is where it poses a huge problem. It poses a lot of stress on the BIPOC individual who's working for these brands or companies or businesses, because now they no longer want to engage. They don't want to do their work. They don't want to be part of something that doesn't value their leadership potential, their skill set, because it's just solely focused on the fact that others, their race or their gender or whatever else that makes them quote unquote different or stand out. Yeah. So one thing I noticed this past summer with the Black Lives Matter was that the Black Square. And I saw a lot of businesses, organizations begin to post a Black Square to stand in solidarity with the Black lives who were carelessly being murdered, and the injustice around the Black Lives Matter movement. And for me, it was very interesting because many of these brands were posting the Black Square. I had approached to them just like in December or just the year before for that to work on diversity and inclusivity in terms of their branding. And all of them were not interested because diversity wasn't trendy at that time. They didn't see the potential. They didn't see the ability for them to be able to reach a very wider market in terms of who they're reaching and who they're selling their product to. In that moment, they were just focusing on their demographic and as well as their regular consumers. They didn't see the possibility of engaging with possible consumers. So I have a huge issue with the Black Square. I'm not a big fan of it. I find it's very tokenistic. It's very trendy. And it's trying to sell your product or you're selling themselves to be inclusive, to be seen as innovative and engaging, and it's a safe space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. When in reality, it's not a safe space to work. It's not a safe space to shop at. It's just not a safe space in general. Diana, we can go to the next slide. So one thing I've also noticed is I was a brand ambassador for a well-known Canadian company. I'm not gonna name them. And I was an ambassador for 2 years. And one thing I find was that it was very tokenistic because they sold the idea of inclusiveness, but they really failed to be inclusive as a brand. As an ambassador for them for 2 years, I did not get the full support that I needed in order to do what I'm doing through Color the Trails, engaging and bringing people of color out to the outdoors. But instead, I was being used to speak at events because I can speak eloquently, I guess. They used me as a pawn in that way. In terms of financial support, there was never a financial support. They expected me to be able to create content and not get paid for it, and decide to have me write stories about how I got into sports like skiing when I had reached out to them and expressed interest and had hoped that they would support me in terms of getting lessons, connecting me with their other ambassadors who are amazing at this sport so they can teach me. But they refused to do that. But instead, once I personally pursued this sports on my own interest and became kind of good at it, they then began to ask me to share my story, to share my journey and the struggles into skiing when they had the opportunity to act, support, and elevate my voice, but they chose not to. So that is very tokenistic way of engaging. It's not benefiting me whatsoever to be able to grow, to learn new things, and knowledge that I can then take back into my community and encourage people in my community to try these new things that I'm trying. There was never any form of support whatsoever. And it's constantly perpetrating this idea of economic inequality. And it takes away my ownership of my own story and the journey that I've taken to create this space for myself in the outdoors. Because now that they see a Black woman who can be plastered all over their website, and then seeing that traction of other Black, Indigenous, or people of color coming in and beginning to enter their stores, it was easy to sell a face, then it was easy to sell a story and the real reality of the racism that exists within the outdoor community, especially in advertising and branding. And this really, for the past 2 years, made me really resent the brand, was really frustrated with the brand. I did not want to be proud of a brand that I felt was oppressing me, was not allowing me to grow, was not excited about any cool, innovative things that I was planning on doing. This past February, celebrating the Black bodies in the outdoors. I had reached out to the brand to support me, whether with providing me space. They basically said they had their hand ties and they could not support me in that. So I had to go seek support outside of the brand that I was supposed to be an ambassador to and who was supposed to support me. So, and thankfully other brands began to step up in ways which I was not expecting. And it showed that I no longer was satisfied. I didn't feel comfortable anymore because it became such a very toxic working environment where I felt monitored. Anytime I branded myself or worked with a different partner to kind of help support the Color the Trail initiatives, I would get emails stating, pointing me to the contract that I'd signed that I cannot work with anybody else. Well, if you don't want me to work with anybody else, you need to be able to provide me with the tools and the resources so that I can be loyal to your branding. But when you're not providing me what I need, I can go elsewhere and find that support because you are in denial and you are in refusal. Yeah, so for me, this is how tokenism really does impact. It's not just about me feeling isolated, feeling depressed, me being angry about how I'm being treated, but it has a deep psychological impact as well. My confidence, my ability to engage and have conversation with people I found myself to be very experiencing some kind of trauma there because I began to see how the system the brands were beginning to use me just as a tool rather than seeing me as an individual who has a lot to attribute and contribute to their branding. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. And I think oftentimes a lot of businesses through marketing, and to be very honest with you, I think a lot of us are very crippled by how we respond to how we show ourselves that in a very authentic way that we are learning and we are wanting to engage and we are trying to create a space to welcome the BIPOC community. And it's very overwhelming because any statement that brands put out now it's met with a lot of criticism, because it's like you've been silent all these years, and now that the topic has become trendy, all of a sudden you have something to say. And I just want to encourage, if you feel crippled by that as a small business or organization, just note that it's going to take some time, but your willingness and consistency and showing up, listening, and not speaking when you're in a space that is for BIPOC is really essential. And I also encourage for businesses to begin to look at, or brands to begin to look at, who are we hiring? Whether it's on the floor, whether it's in the board executive offices, who are the people we hiring? Because it becomes this idea where we hire BIPOC only to do diversity and inclusion work, but then we kind of miss out that there's amazing people who are great at marketing. There's amazing people who are great at design. So why are we not engaging those individuals? And why do we need to only hire people based on the diversity aspect of things? So they can speak to that, but we're not giving them equal opportunity. And one thing I noticed as a brand ambassador was that oftentimes their expectation that I'm willing to do things for free. I get a lot of DMs of people like, please share about our new shoes, or please do this, but they're not interested in compensating me for the time that it takes to hire a photographer to scope out areas where I think will make a great backdrop for the photos, and wording in which I'm gonna write to review the product. All they think is, oh, here's free stuff, produce content for us, or give us a social media shout out. That is not representation. That is tokenistic. That is you seeking me out because I'm a Black woman in the outdoors who's doing fun things, and you want to sell your product, and you're too cheap to pay me to do those things. So then you just kind of want to send me your free things. I'm not really into that, as we all know. I don't think that, exposure pays my bills, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being. I have bills to pay. And if you really value what I'm doing and what I represent, you should be able to value me and putting money into it. And there's a whole lot of articles out there that you can research that shows that Black influencers I always tend to be paid less than they would say white influencers. And how this has been is, I think a lot of times, a lot of the white influencers, because they do come from a position of privilege, they can receive free items here and there because that's not their source of revenue, that they've created a very, I would say, toxic work environment for those of us who are advocating and trying to also create a business out of this industry in terms of supporting brands and representation. Yeah, so I think when you're beginning to hire, or if you're beginning to seek out BIPOC to either share about your create content for you or share about your product, you have to make sure you have a budget for it, and do not pay them less because they may have less following, because micro influencers, we know, have a huge power because people have loyalty towards them and really trust them. So do not undervalue what they can present, but rather play them equitably and pay them fairly. And that's something I continuously continue to advocate for. So anytime I get a DM asking me to exchange anything, I just tell them I'm not interested. If they find budget in their marketing, they can reach out to me. And that's something I've come to do on a regular basis. And through that, I'm actually noticing more and more brands are way more respectful of that. And you'll see, I'll say that a day later, somebody else will intervene and be like, yes, I have budget for it. So let us work together. And for me, I also, with all the brands that I work with, I try not to have a one-time relationship. For me, I ask them, like, you're in partnership with me. If you want me to create content for you, I also run this organization called the Trail Small Business over here. You can continuously support and fund our initiatives so that we can make the outdoor more accessible for you. More accessible for the BIPOC community. That way I'm just not benefiting, but also trying to figure out how can I use this position that I'm in to benefit my community and support my community and get more people who are actively in the outdoors. And being in Vancouver, it's gonna start raining fairly soon, and we get rain oftentimes 30 days of the month. So how am I going to be able to encourage people to be active in the outdoors, stay dry, and work on their mental health? Because we all go to the outdoors to for health reasons, and there's so much benefit to being outside. So that's how I'm kind of working with brands. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so one thing I really want to have people kind of think, I never taken a business course. Everything I've done, I've just been through a lot of reading. I have a degree in international studies, mostly looking at global policy, as well as gender and history concentration. So everything is intersex. One thing I've really been paying close attention to is looking how Rihanna is revolutionizing the either makeup industry as well as the lingerie business, to a point where we see Victoria's Secret closing its door and no longer being able to compete with somebody like Rihanna because of their refusal to really embrace diversity. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so it's very interesting that Victoria's Secret, who's been here, who was there for like a very long time, refused to welcome any form of diversity, because oftentimes it's just very thin, well-built women, and mostly white women, and a few token women of color in here and there, but there's never any form of diversity in terms of body size, diversity into allowing trans women to participate. So Rihanna saw an opportunity there that was like lacking, and how many women felt really left out of that conversation. Whether even myself, like in terms of like buying makeup, for example, I would not find something that matched my skin tone. And Rihanna saw that missing and basically was able to come in and create a brand and opportunity so that every woman from different shades can be able to find themselves in her branding. And I think this is an important lesson that we all really need to learn, because as we're moving forward, the world is becoming more diverse. We live in a globalized world. And this idea of just selling your centric sense of beauty or your centric sense of adventure is no longer going to work because all of us are now becoming interested in these spaces. And if brands or businesses or organizations continuously perpetrate just your centric ideas, they're missing an opportunity, an opportunity to engage, an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to really work on what being anti-racist looks like. Yeah, so if you have any question, please feel free to like continuously ask the questions as we're going through this. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, and just most recently, actually, Rihanna did something like representing a different size for a male model. And because of that, that entire line got sold out. There was like no access to anything. And just like going on Twitter and just reading people's comments, and especially men, seeing themselves represented, it's just really amazing to see how people are celebrating and embracing diversity. And this is something where true representation and not tokenism is being placed into a business, into a company's kind of moral compass, and welcoming everybody to see themselves and identify themselves with somebody that looks like them. And for brands and businesses, I think, you've been given as well as with the COVID and everything that's happening, I think in some ways, we've been given an opportunity to stop and reflect and see how we can do a better job in terms of how we move forward from here. Because as we know, the past, it wasn't working. We were leaving a lot of people behind. But how we move forward is really going to depend on you as a business, as well as whoever owns a business, the leadership, as well as those working for those businesses. Are you pushing buttons? Are you questioning your company, your organization in terms of, are we really being truly representative? Or are we just like trying to find that Black influencer, that queer individual to kind of represent our brand without forming that trust and that relationship? We can go to the next question. Yeah, so as a person of color, as a Black woman, I think I live in two cultures. I have my culture as well as like the white dominant culture that really kind of tells me how, who I'm constantly being met with a lot of questions. And being in this space is not very easy for me because I experience a lot of racism, especially anything that is published online through newspaper and stuff. There's so much racism, so much hate when I speak about the importance of diversity and inclusivity. And being a Canadian, I think we oftentimes forget that there's racism here at home because we focus so much on what's happening in the United States. And it's really up to us to begin to have that conversation, to begin to figure it out for ourselves and not rely so much on what's happening in the US to come into Canada, but rather what are we doing in Canada to make sure that our Indigenous communities are brought into the conversations. Our Indigenous community feel represented every single, in different modeling opportunity, from different branding opportunity. What are we doing to engage that community is a really important thing. And I think also there's a lot of research done out there that, a lot of people are now shopping with their morals. Like, I know I'm really cautious in terms of who I partner with. I engage in long conversation, ask a lot of questions, see what kind of, anti-racism work they're doing in order to make me so that when I come to their organization, I feel safe, that I don't have to question why, I don't have to feel that sense of not belonging, because at the end of the day, I want to belong. I want to feel like I belong, and I want to know that I have a seat at the table, just like everybody else. And the more we're doing that, the more I think we're moving towards a little bit more inclusive. There's still like a lot of work that needs to be done. But at the same time, too, it's really important for individual businesses to begin to kind of reflect what that looks like for them. Yeah, so we can move towards the other slide, other one. So so there was a very interesting thing, because on the side I also help consult and really work with a lot of the BIPOC community who feel that brands are taking advantage of them. And this was something that came from a friend of mine who basically shared this, asking, like, I'm curious about what you might think about company X, because I'm not going to name what company it is, asking me to speak about my non-binariness, encourage me to encourage folks to join the outdoor for International Women's Day. I would send them a few pictures, answer a few questions. I'm on the fence about it. One hand, it feels like an exposure, representation, and strengthening relationship with a power and money holder, but on the other hand, I'm not getting paid for it. It seems like a lot of work for exposure. And they were also working on their non-binariness in terms of like how they relate to it. So for me, this is like an example of tokenism, like a prime example. You're asking a BIPOC to come and share their journey or their experience about who they are. In this case is an individual who's queer and non-binary, sorry. And you're asking them to share their story, but you're not willing to compensate them. And this is really problematic. And I advise this individual to not partake in it because it was very tokenistic. And it seemed like the organization and the brand did not value their work and their story. And they did say no, and only asked to be contacted for paid opportunity. So these are the things that many of us are experiencing behind the scene. This is something that I am constantly experiencing, but also learning to say no and learning to find value in myself and my work and making my work speak for itself, and getting people on board. And if companies see the value in that, they would pay for it. And if they don't, I'm totally okay continuing doing what I'm doing without them. We can go to the next slide. So embracing ideas from your diverse workplace, I think it's really important. This means that if you have a good, diverse employee, people with ideas, I think it's really important as a business, as an organization, to hear them out, to support and encourage and foster their ideas so that it can become in fruition. And as a brand or as a business, it's so important for you to also kind of not just think about like the now, but think about the future. Like, what does your company look like a year from now, 5 years from now? And how are you hoping to grow it? So if you're leaving the BIPOC community out of that conversation, it makes it very, very hard for you to be able to engage them 5 years from now, 10 years from now. As we see, like, as I said earlier, we are becoming we are very globalized. And if you're really kind of not reaching everybody, you're actually kind of doing yourself a disservice, because everybody else who embraces that inclusion, who are speaking about issues of race, they're actually moving a little bit faster than you. And when it comes time that you're kind of miss out on the opportunity. And we saw this with the Black Lives Matter and what's happened this year with COVID and lockdown, that a lot of brands who refuse to, engage in conversation about diversity and inclusion, that they really, once they start posting on social media, once they start putting the black square, we all knew, all of us in the BIPOC community knew it was all fake. It was not authentic. It was just something they had to do or felt they had to do in order to kind of seem like there's like a moral consciousness regarding everything that's happening. So don't just think about the now, think about what things will look like in the future as well. We can move to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so just kind of ending things very shortly, like how we can begin to embrace inclusive marketing. I think it's really important to note that there's no one size fits all when it comes to how we engage with these topics. I think each organization know their need, know their weakness, know their flaw, but I do think that one of the most important things you can do as an organization or business is to honestly begin to deeply reflect and look around your business and your structure and see and figure out what's missing and whose voices are missing, and how then do you foster authentic relationship through that. You're going to mess up, but as long as you're consistent, you're apologizing, that you're actively listening and actually taking those feedback and criticism as a way of improving and doing better, I think this is how it's going to happen. But when you shy away from any form of conflict, or when you turn off your comment section because of the racist, you have to realize that for us within the BIPOC community, we never get to shut off the comments that we hear every single day on the trails or in the workplace or in all these things. Like, that's our experience. Like, we don't ever get the options to do that. So I think it's really important that you have to be willing to be corrected, willing to make mistake and apologize for those mistakes, and then try to do better. Which I think is really important. And then, like I kind of touched already, like who are your team members? Are they a diverse group of people? Who are you hiring? Because it seems like for me, even to get in the outdoor industry, I had to know somebody, or even finding work, I had to know somebody who was in that position in order for me to find work. But as just like a blank applicant applying for a certain job, a certain position, I would never get it, because it's just like the system, the way it works is based on referral. If you know somebody that works somewhere, they're going to hire you. So how are you engaging with the BIPOC community in terms of how you're advertising for job posting? One thing Color the Trail is working on right now is, as we're working on a website, is that we're going to be partnering with a lot of brands. And through those brands, they're going to be able to share with us any job posting that they have coming up. Because while they're sponsoring our events to get people outside, we also want to focus on giving opportunity to people to be able to work for these companies, whether people are in marketing, people are in terms of design, because there's a lot of great BIPOC talent who never really consider even working for the outdoor industry. But as more of them are getting involved in the outdoors, they're seeing like, oh, I can do this as a job. I didn't know I could be a guide. Like, what are the requirements to be a guide? There's just so many things that's not known within our community. And Color the Trails is working effortlessly to really hard, to be able to create that space so that BIPOC can have the opportunity to be able to apply to these different brands, and brands in turn having an opportunity to be able to share their job posting with us so that we can share it with our community. And it starts there. It doesn't have to be with Color the Trails. Is in Toronto, I know there's Brown Girl Outdoor World, as well as Black Canada Hike. There's a lot of different groups. I think it's really important to focus on what's happening in your community and like who are the leaders and innovators within your community that's working towards inclusivity, and being able to hire them on either consulting on your behalf and figure it out how is appropriate way to engage, an appropriate way to market, an appropriate to reach more people that you otherwise would not be able to do. And I think that's again with trusting, with trust and how you earn that trust. Yeah, we can move. I think that's it. Is that it? Then we can go to the next one. Yeah, so thank you so much for allowing me to be able to speak and just kind of share my experiences. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I'll definitely offer those questions. And then you can find me on either Instagram, Juju Milay, or Color the Trails, and my email's right there as well.
Well, thank you so much, Judy, for sharing your experiences. I'm just gonna change your screen right now and focus it on that and pull up some notes here. Thank you for sharing your experiences, you know, the positive ones and the not so positive ones. Hopefully through sharing of all of these different experiences, it'll help awareness of these different issues and red flags, right? Viewers, if you have any questions for Judy, or about Color the Trails, about some of her work, please put it in the Ask a Question section. We have a couple of minutes for a Q&A, and so we will take some questions. I also have, Judy, some for you as well. I do see a question from Demisha, who we've also had, if this is the same Demisha, as a special guest as well. And for this first question, she's asking, how does the individual prevent themselves from being the token?
One thing I would have to say is understanding your value as an individual. When I took on being an ambassador for this X company, it was so important at that time for me to kind of have some kind of representation. But I felt like I was almost sacrificing myself for the goodness of everybody else. And that has left me with a lot of trauma. So if anything, I just ask for, please value yourself. If you value your work, people are gonna begin to see the importance of your work, and they will begin to pay you and support you. Do not take whatever they're giving you. And I see a lot of brands or businesses like to pit BIPOC against each other. They create very limited opportunity for us BIPOC. So it's almost like if I'm gonna go for a job, and I see another BIPOC, then I have to somehow work extra hard so that I get that job and they don't. And as a business or as a brand, I think it's really, really important that you do a better job in terms of like creating more opportunity for people, and not creating this weird idea where BIPOC have to compete against each other, and in an individual way, like trust your instinct, seek out to other BIPOC who are in this space, have them read and review some of what they're offering. And I help a lot of people, like if people are trying, BIPOC are like, this organization wants to work with me, but this is what they're offering me. I'll be like, no, this is how much you should be charging. And if they don't want to, it's up to you. Like at the end of the day, you have to make that decision. You have to see value in your work so that you're not tokenized. Because once you just accept whatever job, then you're kind of stuck in that whatever pay grade is, and it's really hard for you to upgrade. So you either price yourself at value that you think your work is worth and accept that, and sadly you have to turn away a lot of jobs. And I think once you begin to do that, you begin to weed out all the nonsense, and then the good ones are gonna come out.
I smile because I know some of the stories that you've talked about and experiences that you've talked about through your Instagram. I love that you don't hold back in really, you know, sharing these experiences, because a lot of this stuff, you know, it's like negotiating salaries, like negotiating a lot of different things. They're not talked about enough. So it's really great that you're mentioning some of these things that I've read. Yeah. So on that question, there is one from, where is it? There we go. From Heather. As a consumer, how can we identify if a brand is tokenizing BIPOC?
As a consumer, I think you can easily tell when things are being tokenized. Like one game that I used to play about 3 years ago before the whole diversity thing became a trend was I'll go to brands like Instagram account and then I'll just like look through like how diverse are they? From just like their Instagram posting, you can automatically tell that they're not diverse and they're not inclusive. And I started making notes of like those brands who are not, representing the BIPOC community. That's my duty as a consumer, like, because at the end of the day, I want to spend my hard-earned money to a company and business that is doing the most, that is not afraid, that is taking a lot of that heat and continuously just encouraging. And then I also kind of go and look at their board of directors, like who's working for these business, like this company, who are the people? And again, you'll be really surprised. You'll be like, oh wow, they're all white, or and also how they're presenting BIPOC. I think, which is really important. How are they associating the BIPOC community to their brand? Is it through charity? Because one thing I've noticed is like a lot of brands are like, oh, we're giving money to these nonprofit organizations, to just kind of like make you feel good kind of thing, which I think, charitable donation is really important. I think it supports a lot of organization. But if that's all you're doing, but you're not really hiring, you're not really engaging, whether it's your ambassadors or whether it's like different people, then you kind of have to ask as a consumer, like, okay, I need to do a little bit more research. And I just think like researching and understanding and seeing how their Instagram feed are and who are they hanging out with is really important. I don't think there's a definite way, but I think there's just like so many different things that you can look at and be like, oh, wow, this brand is not being inclusive. And a lot of brands now are beginning to put their DEI work online. So like even checking what their DEI work looks like, I think it's just a really good way to continuously try to support brands who are helping and elevating the BIPOC community.
Mm-hmm. And I see there is a question about DI coming up. I do want to insert just one quick question here about some of the things that you just mentioned. So in your presentation, you talked about that, how change will take time. So, for a lot of businesses, large, small businesses, they might not currently have a diverse team. What are some additional recommendations other than just having like a diversity consultant, which I know you recommended in your presentation?
So if not just like diversity consultant, it's also looking at your hiring, like how are you hiring in terms of creating that space and opportunity. If you're in a law firm, are you bringing in a lot of the BIPOC to do articling? It's things like that. You have to be very creative in terms of like, how are you creating opportunity for others to be able to join your network? And I think a lot of businesses really struggle in terms of how they engage that community. And that's what I'm saying, like building relationship with grassroots organizations who are in your field. If you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, whatever field that you are in, trying to find somebody in your local community who are working with the BIPOC community. And then through that, just like showing up, listening, and then begin to be like, hey, how can I work with you? Once you've earned that trust, racial consulting is great. I think it's like, it's needed, but there has to be concrete plan, but it is written in your organization mandate that like, by next year, this is what we want to do. And then try to meet those goals. Like if you don't have it written down, I don't think it's going to happen, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just to put it out there, when we say DEI, it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that leads to the next question from Nicole. If approached by a brand that is asking for your help on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion issues, what would you suggest is fair compensation to ask for?
Okay. because it's a lot of work, honestly, it's like any consulting, anywhere between $250 an hour to $300 an hour. That's what I think is charging fee, because it's not about being too pricey. It's about the work and the research that you're going to be able to present to them, and do an accurate research to be able to help them. So that is like, the ballpark, but it also depends on how big the brand is. If it's like a well-known brand with money, then you charge them $500 an hour. Like a lot of people who are involved in DEI consulting, they have a scale where they have special pricing for nonprofit organization who may not be able to afford the regular, but then have like a higher price margin for bigger corporation because they can't afford it. I think it's really the value that you put in your time, your effort, your energy, and the emotional labor. Like, let's not forget that as a BIPOC, there's also a lot of emotional labor that we're being asked to go to all these brands and all of a sudden start teaching them about diversity, when you're like, that's like long history that I now need to summarize so shortly. And yeah, so I think anywhere between 350 to 300 is a good start. And then depending on what services you're wanting to offer them, you can go up a little bit more.
Great. And I think to your point too, with what you mentioned about, more and more brands are working with individuals and influencers, that I think there are more people being approached for these opportunities, which is a good thing. But I'm just curious, what are some of those red flags that you would watch out for, or you would suggest that individuals or influencers watch out for, that might not just be the compensation piece, like contracts or something like that?
Yeah, reading contract. Do not sign anything that is exclusive. That's one thing I've learned in the past, is like, I'm not exclusive to anybody. Even though I'm currently working with a brand to become their ambassador, that's one thing I was very honest with them in the beginning. I was like, I do not want to be exclusive to you. I'm willing to partner with you and have a relation with you and help your brand, but I'm not exclusive to you, because by me taking on that exclusivity, I'm actually like narrowing down my own financial kind of income as well. It just means like I can only work with this brand, and like I'm missing on a variety of opportunity. And for me, it's also really hard because I juggle kind of like two identities. I work with Color the Trail as like the founder and everything with Color the Trails. And then I have the Judy Milay account that I also do. So it's kind of like, how do I navigate this space? So one thing I've asked a lot of brands, I was like, because you can't pay me as an employee, you cannot afford me. Best is like we partner up, and I'll definitely continuously create content for you, and that it's paid and that it's fair. And a contract that is simple. Like the last the new brand that I'm working with now, the contract was honestly like 5 little sentences. It was very simple. None of this like 20-page, you need a lawyer to read through kind of thing. And I would say like, just be careful in terms of who you're working with, and what are their requirements of you. And if they're just like giving you stuff, is it the stuff that you want, or is it more than that you want? Which I think is really important, because the stuff is great, but you can only have so many down for so long. You don't need that many gloves in a whole year. So it's just like finding that value and just working with that. I think, the red flags is, I would say, do not sign anything that is exclusive unless there's like a really good incentive out of it, that you feel like it's a really good opportunity for you to grow. If not, like, just don't sign anything that is exclusive.
Great suggestion. There's another question from the audience from Mayra. How do you start a conversation with brands that have poor inclusivity? Asking as a Black woman who has also scoured Insta feeds of brands I like and am disappointed with the lack of diversity.
Oh, that's so hard.
So many things to unpack here, but so important. Yes.
Wow, you guys are good. I would say it's a really difficult conversation to have. One thing is, not everybody, but for me personally, I've come to have grace for a lot of people, because it seems like I have to be continuously gracious until they kind of something clicks. And I need to meet people where they're at, because at the end of the day, this is my lived experience. Nobody has lived it. And it's really hard for people to really understand what racism is or how it impacts all the aggressions and things like that. And, and I know a lot of people may not agree that, like, we're being gracious. There's so many books out there, but in the same way, I don't know, I think because of my academic background and just like having professors who were super gracious with me when I was not understanding the assignment at all until something clicked, that I kind of try to show that grace to brands, and continuously having conversation and challenging them and asking. Like, for me, for the past 3 years, I was asking and pointing to a lot of brands and showing up in spaces where I was the only Black person. There's a lot of workshop happening on the outdoors out here in Vancouver, and I would show up and I'm legit the only Black person. And I take ownership in that. I'm not ashamed to be there. I'm not scared to be there. I take my position. I listen. Just being that consistent, I think, is a really good way to continuously challenge those brands and calling people out. Like, you continuously need to call them out. You need to draw attention to it. And if you're not drawing attention to it, I feel like they can easily sweep it under the rug. But if you're constantly challenging, commenting, and really engaging with them, I think that might begin to have a conversation. But it is a very hard time. If a brand does not want to be diverse, then honestly, don't waste your time on them. Try to find somebody else who's doing who's producing the same product, but is different or is more open to it. And that's how I'm kind of going at it. I think we all have our own experiences and how we engage, but for me, that's just what's helped me cover the trails and just being, and just like taking opportunity when it comes.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right too. Like, a lot of people have different, not only experiences, but different approaches as well. And same goes for the small businesses and the brands. They also have different approaches with addressing things. But again, I'm personally really appreciative that you're really vocal on this topic. You're open to talking about it and also giving grace and being positive too. And, just trying to help brands and companies work through. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of the positive feedback from your community on how vocal you've been. Something for the small businesses to consider, what would you recommend for small businesses in terms of addressing negative comments like, no, tokenism doesn't exist, or no, we're not racist, this is not excluding anybody, those kinds of comments?
Yeah, and that's why I said on my PowerPoint, it's really important to really listen, don't speak. Because when you're listening and receiving those criticism, I think it's really important to go back and sit on those criticism, reflect on those criticism, and then look at yourself as a brand and be like, have we created a culture that's not inclusive as a business? Are we, like, when our BIPOC customers come in, how are we greeting them? Are we actually greeting them and like making them feel welcome? Or are we following them around the store to make sure, to just kind of see if they're going to steal anything? Like, what are our biases? I think it's really important that we do that internalized work. And I think this is why I constantly say, please do internalized work. You need to kind of figure out and understand your own biases before, you can get your business to where it needs to be. And do not, just because you say something doesn't exist, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for you, but it exists for somebody else. So you can't say tokenism doesn't exist. Well, it's not for you. That's great that tokenism doesn't exist for you, but it doesn't mean that the person next to you has not experienced tokenism, or racism doesn't exist. It's great if you feel like racism doesn't exist, but that's not the truth of the person who's living that. And I think we have to look at the lived experience of the individual. I'm not sure if we're familiar with the term intersectionality, where everything intersects: our race, our gender, our sexuality. Everything intersects in terms of how we interact in the world and how the world interacts with us. So it's really important to listen. For me, just like listen, take that feedback, sit on that feedback, and then begin to like really deconstruct what's going on. And attend workshop, attend conferences, those are all important things. But I find like listening's, a lot of people just don't listen and can't take feedback at all.
Okay, I'm going to take another question from the audience. We're at time, but Shan wants to know, Can you tell us more about your vision of Color the Trails? I love how you're building a whole ecosystem of supports and opportunities for BIPOC folk.
Yeah, I would love to share. To be quite honest, I'm actually really amazed with Color the Trails going. Because for the past 3 years, I've been knocking, and nobody was interested. So I just kind of, one thing I'm very proud of myself was there was some moments where I was like ready to like just give up and like try to get into government because I was like, I'll make the money, I'll have the pension, I don't need to, do anything else. But just getting a lot of support and people who saw my vision before, like, I had this vision and it was very revolutionary at the time, like to creating this space, but nobody was buying it yet. So with Color the Trails, we have a lot of wonderful opportunities coming up. We are working in terms of establishing and creating mentorship program. And for me, like, I focus on bringing BIPOC into the outdoors, but I also think allyship is really important because everything that I do and that Color the Trail does is very dependent upon the allies also who are basically seeing the benefit or the good that's coming out of it, because everybody at the end of the day want to see other people enjoy skiing, want to try mountain biking. Like, they want to, like almost everybody, yes, there's always going to be that negative individual, but the majority of the people are very much interested in supporting Color the Trails. So we're creating mentorship program. We just tested it out with the mountain biking, Intro to Mountain Biking that we held back in June, where 32 people came and tried mountain biking for the first time. Gear, rental, everything was included for $25. And we're thankful for the business that kind of hosted us for that. And then through that, we saw like there was a huge interest for a lot of these badass Black women who wanted to continue on with mountain biking. So we created a mentorship program where people just pay a fee, where they're basically getting a helmet and all their protective gear and a bike rental for like the X amount of months that we're doing mountain biking. And we pair them up with a member of our community, the mountain biking community. And then they're going riding once or twice a week. It's really cool to see the confidence, to see how everybody is just like growing in the sport. And then we're slowly, our vision also is, like I said, to be able to have a platform where businesses can post job postings so that our members can see opportunity that's available to them. I want to begin to engage, especially with a lot of young university students, because a lot of us don't realize that in university, you can work for Parks Canada and it pays well, and it's an opportunity for you to be able to pay for your tuition. I wish I had known that when I was in my undergrad instead of working in a job that didn't really respect me. So like being able to like mentor people how to apply for those jobs so that we're seeing like our parks more diverse, that diverse representation there. We're hoping to also begin to move a little bit into the storytelling, because I think I love content creation. I want to be able to tell stories of the amazing BIPOC that is within Canada. So Color the Trails is hoping to move a little bit into the filmmaking kind of thing. So we have some interesting project coming up. Comes December, we also have backcountry ski camp. So there's 6 of us who are going backcountry skiing and getting taught by one of Canada's really cool, amazing woman who's like an amazing skier. So she's hosting us for I think 4 or 5 days where we're going to be doing backcountry things. And then we're continuing our program with Color the Slopes, which we teach folks how to ski a snowboard, as well as like encouraging people to try snowshoeing and all that. So our goal is just to basically continue to create that community and continue to help people find their interest and then help them thrive in that interest. So if mountain biking is your thing, we connect you, you thrive in that. Kayaking is yours. We find people in the community to help you with that, as well as send a paddleboard. So there's just like an opportunity for, continuously like supporting BIPOC, not just to try things for the first time, but to continuously find a lifestyle in that.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Juju. Is your slide deck available online? That was a stellar presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Can they find your slide deck somewhere by any chance, or will you maybe post a recap or
did you want to email it to everybody, or can we do that or no?
We could probably try to do that through whoever's registered here today. So
Okay.
yeah, we'll chat about how I can.
Okay. Yeah. If not, people can email me and I can try to make it available. I can condense it and just put it on Instagram.
Cool. Well, Judy, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, again, your experiences, but also so many different examples on how different small businesses or not so small businesses can sort of take away from, what you're doing with the community, the events, some of the red flags and things that you've mentioned. So thank you so much. I do have to wrap this up. I feel like I've got 1,000 more questions on, where do you get your inspiration? You talked about Rihanna. Like, are there any other companies that, you want to highlight before we wrap things up?
Yeah. My inspiration and it's been really, I don't know how other places are, but just speaking from Vancouver area, the Sea to Sky corridor, the inspiration is just seeing the community stepping it up in a way I never thought possible. Everybody's just super excited. One thing is I'm super thankful for Essential Cycles, run by a woman named Jacqueline, who basically is giving us access to her shop to come and take bikes anytime we want so we can go riding. This is and she's a small business. And again, that's what I'm saying, small businesses, you have such a huge impact to play. She's a small business. She's basically welcoming us into her space. And that's also been because as a woman who got into mountain biking, she said she had to face a lot of discrimination and pioneer for a lot of women to take part in mountain biking. And she's that fight is kind of now long gone. Now she's ready to walk alongside me and make a fight so that more BIPOC are represented. And for me, just finding that ally, finding that support. And as a small business, this is how you can honestly be able to support, grassroots organization like Color the Trails or Brown Girl Outdoor World is offering your service because it's going to pay back. I know you might lose a little bit of money, but honestly, the return on that is a great investment because when you pioneer and partner up, people then begin to associate you with the organization and then they begin to come to you. So find creative ways where you can support these grassroots organizations. So yeah, Rihanna is still my favorite. I love Rihanna. So she just needs to jump in,
right? Yeah.
And I'll be happy. But she's still my inspiration because she's doing amazing work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, on that note, you're also a small business that's not going to be so small very soon. But the impacts of small business is small business too, right? So thank you so much, Judy. And thank you all for attending tonight's lively discussion. I will post a link to the Toronto Public Library program survey. If you can all fill that out, let us know what you thought of the program. Let us know what you'd like to see more of, the types of discussions, presenters, all those kinds of things. So don't hold back. Let us know what you think. The recording of this event will be available right after, so please share it with your family and friends who might not have been able to join in live tonight. And we'd like to also thank Shopify for supporting small business programming at Toronto Public Library. Do check out our website for more small business programming or subscribe to this Crowdcast channel. Our next program will be on digital marketing on a shoestring budget with tech expert and author Avery Schwartz. Avery is also the founder of CEO Camp Tech, a tech workshop for non-techie people, and she'll be sharing tricks and tools from her latest book, See You on the Internet, Building Your Small Business with Digital Marketing. This will be on Thursday, October 22nd at 7 p.m. I'll include a link and all that information in my follow-up email, so don't worry. And don't forget to check out the Small Business